Okay, so now we're going to talk about varnishing, which is a super important topic, and you guys have been giving me great questions as we go, and I wanted to really go more in depth in this because it happens to be a topic that very few people know about. And my experience was through my whole undergraduate education, no professor ever mentioned varnishing. And, you know, they didn't talk about it in graduate school either, but that's, you know, by the time you get to graduate school, you're supposed to like figure out materials or know enough about materials on your own. But I didn't know. I didn't even know about varnishing. And the first time I varnished was actually after I'd already sold the painting. And I thought, oh, well, I want to, you know, present this. I want to have it nicely and make sure it lasts. So I better varnish. So I went out to the store and bought some varnish. And it was a very matte, it was actually an oil painting. It was a very matte, subtle, like oil painting, very atmospheric. And I bought a matte varnish because I knew that much, right? I didn't want to put a gloss varnish on this very matte, subtle type of a painting. And I brushed it on, and it was so shiny. And I had a panic attack. I was just like, no, I've ruined this painting. It's already paid for, and what am I going to do? And then I closed the door, and I just left. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I'll see if it's better tomorrow. And I came back, and it was totally matte.
Oh, God.
I was breathed a sigh of relief, delivered the painting. The person was happy. But I'd rather not have other people go through such stress. So I have a few tips on this. I'm a big fan. Oh, this is perfect right here by these canvas panels. So here's a tip. If you haven't varnished a painting before, buy yourself an inexpensive little canvas panel. I don't know, these usually run under $1, okay? Or maybe you have a board, like a piece of plywood, or even just any scrap of wood. You put some gesso on it, or whatever, however you prep your painting surface. And you put it next to your palette like this. Or like I have my paper towels over here, you know, when I'm painting, I keep wiping stuff off. You put it there, and then every time you paint, instead of wiping off on a rag, you wipe off the brush on this canvas board. Then at the end, you will have a canvas board with all your colors that you used in the painting on here, and you can practice varnishing on this little board. And then you can decide, because some people say to me, should I do satin? Should I do gloss? Should I do matte? I'm not really sure what's going to look good on this painting. And then you can just do a strip of the satin or the gloss or the matte and so forth, and then see what looks best to your eye. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So I recommend that, so you don't have to have a heart attack the first time you varnish your painting. So why do we varnish acrylic paintings at all? Because sometimes we see these things, and I'll just pull out this guy because this is sort of a very contemporary approach to acrylics. You see how glossy and shiny it is. You think, gosh, that's got to be bulletproof. I mean, you could throw Windex on that thing and nothing would happen, right?
That's right.
Wrong. This is as vulnerable as our skin is.
Wow.
For the same reason it has pores in it. So if I were to look at an acrylic painting surface on a microscopic level, it's actually porous. There's little tiny pores throughout this. So imagine you've hung this thing in your house. Maybe you hung it above the fireplace, if you're lucky enough to have a fireplace where you live, right? And, you know, and then Uncle Harry comes over with his cigars, and, you know, the cats are around, and, you know, pretty soon stuff is getting on this painting. Dust, smoke, you know, whatever. And these little particles that are in the air go into the pores of this painting, and they get locked in there. Here's the pore, here's the dust. Because you know how good a glue acrylic is? Does anyone realize this? Here's an example. Try and get it off your apron.
Right.
It's really hard to get acrylic off of any kind of absorbent surface. Once it's on there, it's really good at sticking, and that's great for us artists. But it's not good when it's porous and you're having stuff we don't want get stuck in there. So in order to properly finish and protect an acrylic painting, you're going to need a mineral spirit based varnish, okay? So Liquitex makes these Soluvar varnishes. Other companies make other brands, but Soluvar, someone said, oh, I have a friend, you know, art conservator at the Guggenheim Museum, and they use this on the paintings there. These are the reason a conservator might use this varnish is because it's removable. So the state of the art in the conservation science is everything that they do to a painting has to be reversible. And if you're, side note, if you're interested in art conservation, there's some great videos on YouTube. Art conservators showing their art, and you know, I consider with their work, it's a science and an art, and it's amazing and fascinating the steps they go through to, you know, clean, restore, refresh a painting. And there's a lot of thought and a lot of time that goes into that. So it's actually, you'll be doing conservators of the future a favor if you write on the back what you painted with and how you varnished it, and then they know what they can use to clean it with. So this can be removed. This is a removable varnish.
Whoa.
So you can put it on an oil painting or an acrylic painting, and what it does is it creates a seal that will shed dust. It won't have that porous quality that the acrylic will, and then if it does get dirty, as any varnish will eventually over time, it can be removed with a solvent. So and it comes in a spray too if you don't trust yourself to brush it on smoothly. I actually prefer the sprays. They're a little more costly, but it's so much easier, and you don't have to clean a varnish brush. Because I'm very meticulous about cleaning my brushes, and my varnish brush, I can never get it soft again. I see you nodding. Have you tried to clean a varnish brush? Yeah, it's so frustrating. Even if, yeah. So I know one artist actually who teaches in San Francisco at City College of San Francisco, and she told me she has a jar like this full of solvent, and she created a lid for it that the brush just fits through, and she suspends the brush in the solvent all the time. When she's not using it, she never leaves it out of the solvent. Because
those.
They do?
I have one.
Oh, okay. Well, but it seals the solvent in, right? Yeah. Anyway, you wouldn't want the solvent to be able to evaporate. It's like a jar with a lid. Yeah. So anyway, that's what she does, and rather than clean a varnish brush. So anyway, that's why I spring for a little extra for the spray version, because it's easier, and it actually goes better over a textured surface. So let's look at a surface like this. Okay. So if we were varnishing a surface this textured, imagine brushing over it. What would happen in these valleys?
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, gaps. It would pool in the valleys. You might get bubbling and so forth. If you sprayed over it, then what would happen?
Hopefully you don't have that.
You would get a fine mist that would just conform exactly to the contours of the painting. So that makes this a good choice too. The spray varnishes for this type of, you know, textured, highly textured surface. Huh?
Have you sprayed them?
No, because these get passed around as my demonstration examples, and I want people to be able to touch them and feel the medium as it truly is. So they get dirty. See how dirty that is? And that's sad, because I have to make a new one. I can't clean it. It doesn't have a varnish. So anyway, so back to what we were talking about.
Windex.
All right, I'm going to tell you the best practice for acrylic varnishing technique. Okay, oil painters don't have to go through as many steps as acrylic painters. But what is recommended for an acrylic painting is to do an isolation coat. So, the isolation coat is a non-removable varnish. Okay, so there's, you know, Liquitex has this matte varnish and gloss varnish. They actually also make a high gloss varnish and a satin and so forth. Now, what you're going to do is, so you have your painting. Let's pretend I just finished this now. Okay, I just finished this, done, it's dried. You're going to need to let it dry and cure. Curing is different from drying. So dry would be dry to the touch, it's fine, I can move it around, it's not goopy, it's not drippy, and so forth. Curing is when every single molecule of water has evaporated out of this painting. And that could take, on some paintings, more than a week. It could take 2 weeks. Most acrylic paintings would cure and dry within 72 hours or so. You know, so if it's a thin, like here's a more traditional style painting. If it's a thin application with no texture, no raised areas, that's going to be fine to varnish in 3 days. Do you know how long people have to wait to varnish an oil painting?
A year?
A year, 6 months to a year. Yeah, so we have it easy. Acrylic painters have it easy. We get to varnish right away, but fairly soon after, I should say. This has the thicker areas, so this I would wait until these areas were totally cured. The whole thing was totally cured, but these areas might even look a little cloudy before they cure. Any thick layers of acrylic can sometimes look cloudy. So once they're cloudy, this has gone, then you know that it's fully cured. Okay, so you're going to wait for curing, and then you're going to take the varnish of your choice. I would say, even if you're finishing final with a matte varnish, to do the isolation coat with a gloss, because we looked at earlier the cloudiness that can happen with matte. Basically, any matte varnish has any very tiny aggregates in it that help cut light from reflecting out off of the surface of the painting. This might be a little nitpicky, so you can take my advice or not, but if you really want to not at all cloud the painting in one minute aspect, then just do the first isolation coat with a gloss varnish, okay? So we're going to put the gloss varnish on either, now we can't spray, oh no, now the Liquitex has a spray varnish. So there are spray varnishes available for this if you have a textured surface and you want to do it easy. Or you can brush it on. You want to choose a soft brush. So I mentioned I use this Monarch glazing brush, is one nice varnish brush. There are plenty of nice varnish brush out there, and so just, you know, ask at the store and see who, you know, see what they recommend or whatever, ask other artists. But you want to light the painting, so you lay it flat if possible. I mean, if you have a really large work, this may not be possible, but if it's small enough that you can lay it on a flat surface, a great thing to do is to have what's called raking light, or light from a angle, about a 45-degree angle. So let's pretend my water bottle is a lamp. Okay, so I would have a clamp lamp or an angle lamp, and I would light it so that the light hits like this. If anyone's ever mopped a floor and walked out and seen the spot you missed, you understand this principle, right? You couldn't see it when you were standing right over it, but you saw it at an angle. So that's what this is to help with. It'll really give you a good eyeball on the painting, and is it, you know, is there any area that you missed? You can make sure you get an even coverage. So you would just brush it, and you're going to want to do really quick brushing, because you don't want to go back and forth. This is what you don't want to do, because you will get bubbles and you'll get frothing, right? You want to just do quick. Sometimes people will just go in one direction, sometimes people go back and forth. Again, you'll be practicing. Remember your little practice piece over here? So you're going to practice your brushing technique before you do it on an actual painting, so you feel a little confident with your technique. And you're just going to get a nice quick coat on it and then let it dry. Okay? Sometimes people get really persnickety about dust, or if you have pets or a dusty area where you're doing this, make a tent. And sometimes people will just take, you know, cans of paint or something like that and put plastic over it so nothing can fall on the painting while it's dry, no dust can settle on it. Okay, now, then you're going to let that cure. So if you're very thorough, I would do 2 isolation coats. And if you're spraying, definitely do 2 isolation coats, because the spray coats are very thin, very fine. So I would say 2 isolation coats. And you can do those touch dry, so you don't have to wait for it to cure to do the second isolation coat. So if you're in the desert, you might be able to do your second coat in an hour or 2. If you live near the ocean or you have a damp climate, then you might want to wait till the next day to do the second coat. You can see why it's smart to set up a bunch of paintings and do it at once, because there's a lot of steps and all this, and it's nice to just do a batch at one time. Okay, so now we're going to do the final Soluvar, or mineral spirit. Soluvar is the brand name for Liquitex's mineral spirit based removable conservation grade varnish. So you're gonna brush that on. Same thing, you'll use a different brush though, because this is water based. The isolation coat is the water based. This is the oil based, or I keep saying oil based, mineral spirit based. So you're gonna need a different brush for that. You're gonna have to clean your brushes with mineral spirits. So you're gonna have a different brush for that. Same thing, brush quickly, don't go over areas too much because you could do lifting before it dries. But not so rapidly that you get a frothing, and try not to do this back and forth type of thing.
So what if you have like a sizable painting?
Then you need a larger brush than this. You would probably want like a 4-inch, and they do make some really nice soft brushes that are good for these type of varnishing applications. So yeah, so and again, you got to practice. You do one area at a time. You have the raking lights. You know if you're missing a spot, and make sure you kind of. Now, I'm not an expert. I think there are some videos on YouTube of people who are really expert varnishers, and you can get more brushing tips from them. You know, their brushing technique. I recommend looking into that. Okay, so the one thing I forgot to say, if you're using a matte final varnish, you're going to need to stir it with a okay, so you'd open this up and take, you know, like a chopstick or the back of a brush and stir the aggregates up gently. You don't ever shake it, because again, you get kind of frothing and bubbling, exactly what you don't want in a varnish. Okay, so you would stir it gently to agitate those and get them into the mix before you brush it on. And no, not these. These, it tends to stay in suspension. I've never had to stir an acrylic base, but these mineral spirit base, for some reason, the aggregates don't stay in suspension. They tend to settle at the bottom. So you'd want to just gently stir to make sure. And don't worry, like I said, even if it looks really glossy, it will dry matte. Don't panic. I have a little board here that shows, I'm not sure you'll be able to see this, and this, I've had this for a long time, so, but if you can tell, like, do you see how deep the black looks with a gloss on it? And, or sorry, this is the gloss, and it looks a little flatter with a matte. Do you see that?
Yes.
So it's just something to keep in mind. That's why I said have your brush strokes, because sometimes you'll want to make things look a little flatter. Sometimes you want the gloss to add the depth and richness, especially over dark areas. My little sample that I made, I wasn't really thinking about that. I would have done like a dark background to really show the difference. This is the matte side and this is the gloss side, and I feel like it's really not a big difference. For this painting, I could do matte, I could do gloss. I don't really feel there's a big difference. But if you have a painting with a lot of dark areas, then you will really notice a big difference between the gloss and the matte. And so